Welcome to Cracking Legal Innovation. Today, we're joined by Isabel Parker, Chief Innovation Officer at White & Case. My name's Anthony. I'm the CEO at Legatics, and I'm joined with my co-host, Daniel. Daniel Porus is our Chief Commercial Officer at Legatics. White & Case are a global firm. They have 40 offices in 30 countries. It's very likely you've heard of them. They're seen as a leader in digital transformation. And Isabel has had a really interesting career. I first met her when she was the Chief Legal Innovation Officer at Freshfields, probably just over 8 years ago. She then went on to become a partner at Deloitte before taking on her role as Chief Innovation Officer, which has a global remit at White & Case. She's written a book called Successful Digital Transformation in Law Firms, A Question of Culture. And when I think about Isabel, I definitely think of her as the expert on culture. And for as long as I think we're building software, so much of what we're doing is behavior change, dealing with the people behind the software. And I'm really looking forward to having that conversation with Isabel today. What's drawn you to culture as a key focus of your work?
Well, innovation can't take hold unless you have really sustained cultural change. That's definitely true. And there are elements of innovation that are really predicated on successfully changing the mindset of an organization. And so, the two go very much hand in hand for me. And I'm sure you found the same in your world, and particularly in incumbent sort of legacy organizations that have been grown up a certain way, have a certain organizational structure, a certain type of rigidity, and loads of success. Innovating those organizations is a challenge. And to do that, you have to impact at the cultural level. So for me, it's just a critical part of any kind of change, any kind of innovation, cracking the culture piece.
Yeah, I think, if I think about what we do, we spend a certain amount of time building software. And actually, I quite often think that the software we're building isn't that complicated. It's all about how do you bring it to lawyers? How do you present it in ways that meet their ways of working or sort of give them like confidence or trust or something they can adopt? And we work really closely with innovation teams who are rolling out the software, and it just becomes so much of the piece of the puzzle. I mean, did you think law firms are kind of weird culturally? I grew up in a law firm, and then you kind of see the rest of the world and you think like, oh no, that is a very specific culture. And sometimes only by kind of coming out of it do you realize how specific that is to law firms.
Yeah, I think they do have a very unique culture, but it's easy to sort of over-index on the more negative elements of it, I think. And there are also, I've grown up in a law firm culture for most of my career, and I have been outside of a law firm culture, which I think has helped me get a bit of perspective, as you say. And the strengths of the culture sometimes are underplayed. So I do think the one thing that law firms do, well, not the one thing, one of the things that law firms do incredibly well is they are very, very focused on their clients. They are, ultimately the client is king or queen, and client centricity is really, really important. And I think that's critical for innovation. So if you're not shaping around the client, just with your software development, if you're not shaping it around your clients, you're not going to sell. So I think law firms do that incredibly well. They certainly also have the capacity for lots of hyper focus. We know that lawyers work incredibly hard, and that can be a very important element of innovation as well, and a very strong cultural element too. And the partnership generally is a sort of beautiful construct, really, when it works well. It's weirdly sort of non-hierarchical. It's democratic, it's consensus-driven, it's everybody owning. It's not a corporate structure. So really, there are lots of elements of the law firm that lend themselves to innovation and a great strength. And then there are a few things on the other side, as we all know, that make cultural change in a law firm quite difficult and make law firms pretty unique. Not least, I think, the kind of A-type personalities that get attracted to law, and not just like big law, all law firms, people that like to really, really achieve, really see things through, quite focused on a goal. And that can be a strength, but also it can mean there's not much psychological safety for failure or experimentation. It's all about precedent and what works and zero risk. And that in a law firm culture can make innovation change quite tricky, I think. And just one more on that. There's also a bit of for partnerships really to function effectively, you've got to really trust your fellow partners. That's what it's all about, ultimately. And you are more inclined, I think, as a human being, to trust somebody that sort of walks and talks like you and dresses like you and went to your school and, went to your university. So there is a tendency towards a sort of homogeneity of culture, which I don't think is necessarily the best environment for innovation, which needs a bit of diversity, a bit of challenge. So some of the things that hold up and shore up the partnership model are also the things that make innovation difficult, I think.
I'm interested, Isabel, you're sort of alluding to it in what you're saying now, but there are some elements of things that are across the board with law firms culturally, but then there are nuances in terms of culture within, different organizations as well. And you've been in this industry long enough that you'll have a lot of peers within other firms also driving innovation. You've also, been within Freshfields, now at White and Case, having had the experience with Deloitte as well. What's your view on, how those, how different culture is at play maybe with, different types of law firms? What is the same across the board, but then how culture is nuanced within different organizations?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think all organizations have their own flavors, don't they? Definitely. And although there will be similar challenges across law firms and indeed like highly regulated organizations, I think, it's not just law firms, professional services generally have very similar characteristics, but every organization has its own flavor. But there's a kind of, one of our values at White Case is pioneering. It's united human and pioneering. And that pioneering element, that kind of slight grittiness is something I really feel lived out genuinely. So there's a grittiness and a pioneering element that is very unique to the firm and actually is a fantastic foundation for innovation. So if I can harness that, that would be great. With a sort of Deloitte, again, it's a different organization. I was within Deloitte Legal, which is a very small part of a huge organization. And there you had a lot of capacity for investment in technology in particular, which you don't necessarily get in a law firm. So Deloitte was investing billions in generative AI when I joined and led our Gen AI efforts at Deloitte Legal there. And that was a real privilege to be part of that. And of course, that adds another element to the innovative mindset, the innovative push, the fact you have access to this technology and transformation capability that you don't necessarily have in a law firm environment. So what am I saying? I'm saying there are lots of similarities across law firms. Every organization has its own flavor. You have to tap into what makes that particular organization unique, what the strengths are, pull on that and use that to sort of move the firm forward and change the culture, adapt the culture.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think something I realized as we were sort of scaling out Legatics was a bit of a lesson in humility, really, where we'd had, a couple of really successful rollouts with firms, and we'd developed a bit of a playbook as to how that works. There's a real sort of collaborative approach that you do have with doing that, but when we'd seen it play out in a very similar way in a couple of firms, we wanted to just roll that playbook all out with, let's say customer number 3, and actually got a lot of pushback or realized quite quickly that some of that just wouldn't work. And that's been quite interesting to continue to see play out, different markets, particularly a global firm like White and Case, I imagine, like there are different cultural dynamics in different offices. And there are constantly partners moving from one firm to another that bring with them their different cultures. If there are mergers, that are increasingly happening.
Yeah.
That has its challenges as well. And actually, what we've found is a very collaborative approach to actually really understanding what is the culture of the law firm. Yes, we can say we've worked with X number of law firms and we've found that these things have worked, but actually almost asking the firm, do you think these things would work? Can you tell us a little bit about, any cultural barriers that may come up that might mean that this doesn't work? I mean, does that relate?
Yeah. Definitely true. Like that whole, and you must face this every day as you're trying to sort of get your technology adopted within law firms. What's going to work here? And one of the real challenges I always think is finding out, is trying to mapping the stakeholders, if you like, or just understanding where the soft power lives, because it's not always necessarily, the most senior partner. There can be all sorts of power structures and influencers, and working out and mapping out where they live and how to use them is really, really critical. And when I was at Freshfields, I'd grown up there as an associate, as a trainee. I've been there for so many years. I kind of knew all the sort of buttons to press. And then coming into a new environment, when I went to Deloitte, it was so enormous. That took ages to navigate. Coming into White and Case, smaller than Deloitte, but bigger than Freshfields. Navigating that landscape is really tricky, but really, really critical. And one of the keys to success, I think, in any new organization is working out that landscape really, really fast and being able to sort of not manipulate it, but work it a bit. different level.
Yeah, I think we've started to see a bit of a shift as well. Like when we first started selling technology, it would be a random partner would put their hand up and say, I want this in my practice, and maybe would even have some budget and just go ahead and procure things. And over time, we've seen more and more innovation teams come in, more and more central joined up innovation strategies come in. I don't know whether you've sort of seen a little bit of a shift, or I don't know whether there's a kind of inside story there of some changing versions of who's actually in charge in the firm and what that's been like from the inside.
Interesting question. So I think there's definitely been a shift, but again, it's hard to know whether that's a shift in maturity of the sort of technology, maturity of the vendors, different firms that I've worked in. But I think the more, to your point about strategy, the more strategic a firm is, the more joined up they'll be about the sort of right governance for this kind of activity. So I think where you're finding in your sort of interactions with firms, if you're finding that you're even able to get in to speak to a load of different partners, I wouldn't recommend it because it really is quite annoying, actually. Because it will all lead back to the same place at the end of the day. But if you're able to do that, I suspect there's something not quite right working in that firm, because how it ought to be is that you have a clear strategy, you've aligned around some really key strategic partners for the firm, you know that Legatics is what you want to go with because it's the best on the market, and you're doubling down, you're working, as we are with you at White & Case, working with you as strategic partners, and that's communicated to the firm, and they know, they know where we're headed, and that strategy is used as a sort of sword to help the innovation team move faster and be effective, and also as a shield to say, no, we're not going to bring in X, Y, and Z because we have our strategic partners here. Unless there's a really compelling business case, we're just not going to do it. So maybe that's a shift and a maturity thing, or maybe it's just the firms that do it well have a strategy that defend it. And we had that at Freshfields, we had that at White & Case. I feel like
It's definitely not ubiquitous, I can
we've
tell
got
you
it
that.
right.
But maybe a follow-on to that then, Isabel, like what does happen if you've got very senior, important rainmaking partner saying, I need X solution. You've already got Y solution that does, what you need, but he or she's stamping their foot and saying, no, we need this. How do you deal with that? You've got the kind of strategic approach, but just the realities of dealing with someone like that who might put a spanner in the works.
It's very hard, actually. And I would say I've only been at White & Case for 9 months now, and I haven't had any of that behavior so far. So hopefully culturally that's not something that happens, but it has happened in other organizations that I've worked at. And no matter what strategy you have on paper, there will always be these kind of individuals who have, maybe for very good reason, they have a very strong conviction that they want something and they need something. And you can see that from a strategic perspective, it really isn't what the firm should be doing. I think you have to take a very robust line on that personally, because I think there has been a slight shift, and maybe this goes back to your question, Anthony, about how things have changed. There used to be a very clear fee earner, fee burner, as they used to horribly call it, divide. So if you're in the partnership or you're an associate, you rank higher than the business services colleagues. And I do think that has changed a little bit, or maybe I've got more senior and I don't see so much of it. I don't know. But I certainly feel it less now. But there is a lingering within our business services, business professionals colleagues, there's a lingering service mentality where you sort of, if a partner asks for something, you will deliver it. And what I'm trying to really push my teams to do is to say that we're also professionals. We've worked in this environment for a very long time. We do know what's best for the firm. We do understand the total cost of ownership of technology investment. We have a clear strategy we're aligned to. So we're going to our professional opinion. We are going to push back and say that's not right for the firm. Does that always work? Well, I'm sure there will be occasions when it won't. Then you have to have the right governance structures in place to make sure that you can have those conversations at the right levels. At White & Case, for example, we have an innovation committee. That's a partner and associate-led committee. And I think escalations of that nature, should they ever occur, and they haven't so far, would go to that committee, who would make the ultimate call as owners of the business. So I hope it would happen less these days, but it will certainly still happen.
It sounds very healthy and it sounds very organised, and credit to you for making sure you're always working or putting in place organisations with those governance structures. I wonder if there's, I don't know, maybe it's hard for me to see a little bit as well, because I'm on the side of having been a lawyer, Dan's on the side of having been a lawyer, you're on the side of having been a lawyer, where there is a little bit of a you've either been a lawyer, you understand what we do, you're one of us, or you're not. And whether there's some degree of kind of prejudice that goes with that, whether maybe at Deloitte you started to see sort of more of a kind of equal standing between different areas of the business and different skills, just recognizing that the kinds of projects they deliver sometimes require a lot of technology, sometimes require a lot of professional services, and that gets a bit more mixed up. And then maybe it's occurred to me that maybe that's actually starting to change a little bit in firms as with the advent of AI, as things get a little bit more complicated, as lawyers start to feel actually I'm a little bit more out of my depth now and I'm having to look to these teams for kind of expertise. I don't know if that's changing at all now as well.
So unpacking that, because there's a lot in that question. So definitely, I think things are changing, and certainly in Deloitte. I mean, Deloitte Legal is a very small part of a very big organization that didn't do legal other than Deloitte Legal. So actually, the lawyers had to work quite hard to sell the proposition into the firm. So that was already a massive shift. And it was genuinely multidisciplinary teams, because we had a legal management consulting team, you have transformation teams, and you have lawyers working together. So that was an interesting space. Within within White and Case, I think generative AI has slightly shifted the I don't want to say the power balance. I mean, it shifted the dynamic a little bit, because it is a general purpose technology. You could use it anywhere. It's not a tool. It's not a legatics for something or an e-discovery tool for something. It is something you could apply like electricity wherever you want it to. So in the words of Ethan Monach, I don't know if you follow Ethan Monach on LinkedIn or in his writings, but he's a Wharton professor who I think is absolutely brilliant on these points. And he says, you have to put this technology into the hands of the users, and then they'll tell you what the use cases are. You can't outsource that to McKinsey, and you can't, or to your tech teams. It's got to be the users who use this technology and tell you where it best plays. I really believe that. So I think never before have lawyers been more important in this mix, actually, as SMEs, to say, this is how we can spot opportunity for this in our own practices. That said, I do still get a few questions from lawyers who haven't really used AI, Gen AI. Give me a list of use cases for, capital markets. It's like, well, I can, but, I don't think they're going to be very helpful to you. So I think the dynamic has shifted in that, in a way, lawyers are more important than they've ever been before. However, they can't do it on their own. We do need the right, application builders. We need the right people that understand the infrastructure. They understand these models, who've worked with them, who can build with them, who have the data engineering and data science skills to clean up our data so we can work with them. So I think there is also a renewed emphasis on the importance of those technology skills. And I think that's going to only increase. So it's not as though lawyers have become sort of less important or that the balance has really swung towards the tech teams, if you like, or the AI capabilities. I think there's a sort of rebalancing whereby the lawyers are more critical than they've ever been before, but will appreciate that they need the support of the tech teams to do that as well. Sorry, it's a bit of a long-winded answer, but you see what I'm getting at. Lawyers are more important than they've ever been before in many ways, but they can't do it without technologists. And I think that will become more and more evident in the future.
So I'm interested in the culture of a firm as a whole, and then you sort of have, I suppose, subcultures within law firms as well. And that can be, especially for a global firm, you've got, geographical cultures, but you also have kind of the different cultures depending on teams. You already referred to fee earners, fee burners, but you've got the people who support, those who are doing the fee earning work. You've also got within that partners versus all the way down to like the trainees, etc. How do you think about that from a cultural perspective when you're trying to think about driving innovation and change within a global organization?
Yeah. So there are many, many kinds of segmentations you could make. I mean, my observation would be from a law firm perspective, they don't really get change management. It's not something that's an established part of how law firms operate in terms of their operations. And I've often seen change management sort of brought in as a add-on capability and not be very successful. And there's something about it that annoys lawyers somehow. They don't like the concept, but it's so important. It's so important. And we, as part of our strategy, we have a huge change work stream. I'm calling on the support of some really experienced change managers that have done this before in a law firm environment to help us support that, because having the right frameworks in place, communicating in the right way, really thinking about different stakeholders and what motivates them and incentivizes them and how to communicate effectively to them is going to be critical to how we are successful. I think you do have to do that work up front. You have to have the right framework. You have to have the right experienced professionals. It's not just something you can repurpose someone to do. It's a skill like any other and experience. So we're over-indexing on that. That said, I think the sort of very clear generational demarcations, like saying the executive cares about this and senior partners care about this and associates care about this and trainees care about this, I'm not sure that holds actually. It's more, what kind of learning journey are you interested in? There are plenty of senior lawyers who are really deeply interested in the technology. And there's plenty of juniors who really don't care about it and they only care about clients. So I think finding a way to serve up the right kind of training and guidance and support, not by grade, but by interest, that's what I'd really like to get to. And I think that would be very successful if we can pull that off.
Very interesting approach. To draw on one of the things you were just talking earlier about the transformation and change and drawing on some expertise there, I've noticed an interesting trend, particularly amongst the AmLaw, some of the bigger AmLaw firms, with actually hiring in very senior behavior change professionals. Met recently the person at King & Spalding and Reed Smith, actually, who's been hired in at director level roles there, and actually went to a fantastic talk in Chicago with Julia Montgomery, who's the Director of Practice Enablement at King & Spalding. And one of the things that was interesting there, and I'd be interested in your take on this, Isabel, but on her talk, she gave some stats around 3 key metrics that are basically looking at the general population around how skeptical, how resilient, and how autonomous people are in the general population. So if you've got an index of like 0 to 100 and the average is 50,
yeah,
it noted that lawyers are more skeptical, less resilient, and more autonomous than the general population. And it was like off the scale for some of them. For skepticism, it was 90 versus the general population at 50. Yeah. For resilience, it was 30 versus the standard at 50. And for autonomous, it was 89, again, up at the sort of top end of the scale. And what I found very interesting is how that then guides how you think about actually engaging with the partnership, for example, and actually bringing in something in the first place. And then once it's in, how do you actually get it adopted? So yeah, I'd be interested in your reflections on that.
Definitely. And I wasn't going to quote from this, but as you said it, I did pull out on my notes something really interesting that our change management lead sent to me. And it's called the common behavioral biases of lawyers. It's like a table. It's got the bias on one side and what this sounds like on the next. I'll just read you a couple of them. One of the biases: high perfectionism, what this sounds like: I need the exact right answer before acting. High neuroticism: if I miss this client deadline, I'll get fired. Low extroversion: I don't want to try something new until it's tested. That all resonates. Low resilience, to your point: my stress levels are going through the roof. High autonomy: I don't need any help. High urgency: it's got to be done by the end of the day. And high skepticism: I don't believe you'll do what you say you'll do. And she's using that as a guide for how we communicate out. And that's really critical. Understanding these biases is really critical to being able to help people be effective and be able to consume what we give them in the right way. And we have an associate secondee who's joining us just to try out a secondment program within our innovation team. And one of the first things she's doing is looking at our training curriculum. And she's not too bothered about the content, but she's like, the thing we really need to work on here is everyone's so busy. You get an email from learning, you're just going to delete it. How do we somehow find a way to find a slot in their calendar and say, oh, I see you've got 20 minutes on Tuesday. Can I just put this in here on an automated basis? So if you could do that, you would win. So it's very interesting to just try and understand the biases and how you can work around them or work with them. Yeah, absolutely.
I find that fascinating. I mean, when you talk about the biases, like I sit here and have a giggle. I think we all kind of laugh, and it plays to what I think we already know about lawyers and possibly ourselves having been one. And you kind of know that's the environment. And I speak to a lot of innovation teams who do get frustrated and are constantly coming up against these cultural barriers, who are trying so hard, who are trying so many strategies, who are getting quite frustrated in their roles at not being able to crack this. So I'd love to hear more in terms of what can you do given that knowledge, which isn't necessarily absolutely revelatory, but that is the organization that we're working in. Like, from a positive and from a change perspective, what can we do?
Yeah, and I think it's such a big learning for me that, because if you go onto LinkedIn or you read the change books, it's all about, well, the partnership model, it's just inimical to innovation. We need to explode it out. And it's all about ripping stuff up and getting rid of the model. And that's just not ever going to work. It's never going to work. And you have to look at what's made this model really successful. Stop beating up on the law firms. There's plenty of things you can beat up on them about, but any organization you can beat up on. There are so many strengths to law firm model, which has been incredibly successful on many metrics for many, many years. So we shouldn't just be chucking away everything that has worked. And we need to respect that as well. I really do believe that. And as a former lawyer, both of you as former lawyers, you will respect that too. So there is something to be said for the ability to focus really hard on a goal and do the absolute best for your client and not go home until that happens. And I bet you do that in your jobs as well, so there's something to be said for that. So I think trying to force a different way of working into the wrong hole, square peg into the round hole, isn't going to work. So you have to understand all these biases, the positive as well as the negative parts of those, and try to find a way to link into them and use them to your own advantage. That doesn't neatly answer your question about how. I think if I knew that, I'd be writing other books and another podcast.
Another bestseller, yeah.
But
I do very much agree, though. Like, if I think about how we design the software and I think about like what I think has made us successful, it's not like always some huge technological innovation. It's getting it exactly right to lawyers. And I remember one of the first things we did is we said, we're trying to get lawyers to move from managing their transactions in big tables in Microsoft Word into an online interface. And one of the best things we can do that is to make the interface look exactly like the tables in Microsoft Word that they're used to doing, and give them the ability to download it again in a table in Microsoft Word if that's what they want. So you're saying like, okay, well, we know we're going to meet the lawyers where they're at. We're going to understand that there might be pretty good reasons why they've sort of developed ways of doing things, or whether they are good reasons or not, I don't know, but they have a certain way of working, and we're going to work with the culture. We're not going to say, no, just scrap everything you're used to and come and adopt something new. We're going to give you a lot of security that your data is still there. You can go back to the old way of doing things if you like, that, there's some nice automation, but it's going to come through an interface that you're familiar with. And I think there's a lot we do, certainly on like the design side of the software, that is always thinking about like what's that lawyer mindset, and we meet them where they're at.
I still quote you on that, because I remember when you came in really early days in Freshers, you said, and we can convert it back into a table. And I still quote you as meeting lawyers where they are. So I completely agree with that. And as we start to think about our own strategy, which I'm not going to give too much detail on for obvious reasons, but there's definitely something around adoption and making sure that something that lawyers have developed themselves using their own data, their own way of delivering, their own White and Case way of delivering, and being able to reflect that back to them, which I think will really drive adoption here. So something that looks and feels like who we are as a firm, rather than maybe buying a different kind of enterprise platform that might give us a bunch of use cases that will be fantastic and really resonant, and then a bunch that won't, and having to pay for all of them. Doing a little bit of what can we do with our data, our people, our expertise, our clients, and our way of delivering that really feels like us and is developed by us. I remain to be challenged on this, but I really feel that's going to drive adoption. I really do. And it's something about not trying to completely take lawyers out of the way they're working now, even though everything you read on LinkedIn or in the books tell you that's what you should be doing. But I'm not sure that's the way to success. I'm with you. I think you've got to meet them where they are. You've got to.
I think the other thing with meeting the lawyers where they are, and this is something that I suppose it did surprise me a little bit as we've evolved, but when you sit down and you get feedback on a product like Legatics, sometimes it is them saying, okay, we need something in the product and the product needs to change. But actually, sometimes it is that the process needs to change a little bit to adapt to the particular product. And it's almost like both things move along in time. And that was actually quite an interesting revelation, that sometimes you sit down with them and it's almost like reimagining solutions within the existing product, how they could change their work. And then, yes, there are always iterative changes that make things better. But that ultimately gets you to a point where, change does happen over a period of time that would have been far too scary had it just been, right, this is new world, go in and do things in this entirely new way. They kind of come on that journey with you a little bit, which, I think that's been really interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. I hadn't thought about it like that. And on the sort of UX sort of front, I see a lot of product demos, obviously, in my line of work. And sometimes you see things, I just think, no lawyer's ever going to use that. I just can't say, like, it's a brilliant idea and you can tell the engineering is good and it's a fantastic team and, you know, everything's great, but it's like, just, I know no one's ever going to use it. And you get a real instinct for it after a while. But then maybe to your point, Daniel, we should be challenging that instinct a bit and saying, you know, maybe over time that could start to shift a way of working.
I think it's a bit of give and take. It ultimately is sitting down and working out, right, you know, what is something that can be solved in product? And this is actually just something that doesn't work because the product doesn't deal with it. And how much of this is actually something that if you adapted your practice a little bit, that, you know, that this could really help. And sometimes there are huge things that can be achieved by doing that. Part of the challenge has been very nuanced ways in which team X does something versus team Y. And actually the firm as a whole could benefit from some standardization. And you engage with, and this again comes down to the different persona point, because there's maybe a knowledge management aspect to that. You sit with the knowledge management team and say, right, and this has been the case with Legatics sometimes, this can be an opportunity to standardize how we do, you know, a particular type of deal or do things in a particular office, particularly again, when you've got, you know, partners or teams constantly coming across from different firms. Like, how do you define the way a particular firm does something or a particular team within a particular firm does something? But
Interesting.
It's an evolution.
And I wonder, you know, as lawyers in their personal lives start to experiment more with AI, as I think everybody is, because I get a lot from our lawyers now saying, oh, I've experimented with, let's say, deep research. It's brilliant. Why can't we do that? I wonder if the amount that they're experimenting will actually start to influence the way that they work or unpick some of the biases about what can and can't be done. Because in a sort of Gen AI context, an LLM context, you're going into one environment, you're doing something, you're coming out, you're going in somewhere else. And we've always sort of thought, that's not what lawyers want. They want it all in their workflows, but maybe not. Or maybe this is just part of the maturity. They'll accept it for now, but ultimately people want it all to be in one place.
I find it really interesting to then think as well, related to that, is we're going through a cultural shift with all the technology that's happening. And I think we've already seen over the course of the, you know, 8 years or so that Legatics has been in the market, we've seen those trainees that used Legatics become the associates and now they're junior or even senior partners. And you see the kind of shift that happens with that, with, you know, how much technology has been part of their lives just generally and part of their working lives versus that older generation that maybe, you know, haven't been as used to it or are a little more stuck in their ways.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's interesting to think now, like the generation that are coming through into the law firms, I mean, they've only, you know, I remember starting as a lawyer when I packed up my computer, I didn't even have a laptop to start with. Like, my work was in the office. They would call me if they needed something and I'd have to come back in. You know, I speak to my dad, who was a lawyer. I mean, he went through the transition to using a computer, full stop, let alone, you know, and exchanging drafts with tabs and stuff. It's interesting to imagine now these juniors that are coming through and what is it going to look like for them when they're a partner, you know, within a law firm. And it must be a huge challenge for you, I imagine, Isabel, to kind of almost imagine that law firm that you're building towards, probably for those who are going to be the partners in 10 years' time.
Yeah. I mean,
and how do you navigate the challenges while the incumbent culture is still there within an organization?
Yeah, it is. I'm not very good at futurology. I've never been, I just can't, I'm not a futurologist, so I can't look 10 years ahead. I really can't do that. I can I can spot opportunity and I can strategize about it in a shorter term time frame, but I've never been very good at projecting for the next, 10 years. And I couldn't with confidence say what that's going to look like, because we've been in this sort of innovation game for a very long time now, really. We have been saying for a very long time, everything's going to change, and not very much really has changed, actually, incrementally around the edges a bit. And I do believe Gen AI is different. I do. And I remember the first time I saw a sort of proper demo of it was Anthropic's Claude, actually, really feeling emotional. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I was like, I wanted to cry. I was like, oh my goodness, the whole world has changed. Everything's going to change. And I do sometimes still feel that. I really do. But how that's going to impact, I can't project it out yet. And I don't know if you two have a better sense.
I think it's very dangerous making these kinds of predictions. In a way, sometimes it seems really, really easy. You just sort of say that everything's going to talk to each other. Everything's going to be connected. We'll take all the technologies to their kind of foregone conclusion. And sometimes I get a little bit frustrated with certain kind of visionary individuals who get a lot of conference speaking slots, who present this view. And I'm like, well, yes, maybe that in a way it's obvious that, like, yes, all technology will talk to each other and all the bits that could be done by AI will be done by AI, and you just take it all to its logical conclusion. For me, the much harder thing is like, what are the practical steps along the way that are going to get you to that world? What is the interim step that is palatable to a lawyer, that can be done with technology today, that is, from our perspective as well, we have to make sure that we're doing things that will sell in the market and take us on a journey that is viable via the interim steps to get to that point, because there's all sorts of integrations and data structures and things we could do today that don't work if you've taken all those steps in the interim, and that's a much harder question, and I think a more valuable one to answer.
Agree. And we think about young lawyers coming through and being completely technologically savvy, but I would just walk past an office just yesterday. There's quite a young lawyer in there, must have been an NQ, newly qualified, with like a hand marker, a printout, hand marking up. I was like, wow, not that much has actually changed in a way, if people are still doing that, because I didn't think people would still do that. There are lots of offices with loads of paper, and there's the odd office with no paper at all. So it's definitely a transitional sort of
I think it's good not to think about it as this young and old thing as well. I think that has the tendency to like annoy some people as well, because there's certainly people who are enthusiastic and people who aren't, and it doesn't always correlate with age. And I think what there has been are people who are enthusiastic and people who aren't. And what's always worked for us, and a lot of innovation teams have kind of come to this conclusion, I think, is start with the people who are really enthusiastic, start with your champions. And that's always worked compared to I think it's that meet the lawyers where they're at thing. Like, go find the lawyers who do want to change, go find the lawyers who want to lead that. And I think that a Gen AI thing, what that's done is it's just created far more of them. There's just so much more excitement for technology and for the benefits that it can bring to practice. So I think it's always been about finding the people who want to change and the champions, and now there's just more of them as well.
Definitely. I think that's a big part of driving that cultural change, is finding the champions and doubling down on them. The flip side of it is the threat side. And I think it's important to have your eye on that threat side of what's really going to disrupt us here. And it's not quite clear what that is yet, but I do have quite a strong conviction, having worked at Deloitte on the client side, that lots of clients are looking to use this technology themselves to do more themselves, which will ultimately disaggregate. I really believe that. Although there'll always be that higher value work, that super brain work that arguably only top law firms can do, there will be less of it, and that will make competition even hotter. And it's very, very hot competition right now for talent, as you know. So I think that will be a change that we'll see.
So interestingly, Isabel, I actually think it relates back to the first challenge that you were talking about the client piece and the degree to which they start doing, some of the work themselves. I actually had a really interesting chat yesterday with a global head of pricing for an AmLaw firm, and one of the things that we were discussing is this point about, where is the value in the work, and how adept actually are partners in actually having the conversation with clients around value. And I know it's something you've touched on in your book as well, but you talk about being very, law firms and lawyers are very client centric, but actually what does that client centricity look like, and how do we talk about value, and where does that value lie? I do believe we're entering this new era where those firms who can actually talk about value a lot better, and that value has a data piece to it as well. You've got to be armed with the data around, how's the deal being run? How can we deliver this more effectively? Even maybe being open. I mean, everyone sees the profit margins of the firms. Let's talk about where the value lies in there.
Yeah.
And I find it fascinating to think about, if you're financing a wind farm and through better use of technology and people and process, you can deliver that in 3 months, not 6 months. Should you actually pay less for that, or should you pay more for it?
Exactly.
I don't know, it feels like people almost don't want to enter into that conversation with the clients often, because it raises up issues to do with the billable hour and various other things. But it could be such an opportunity for the firms who really lean in, I believe.
Definitely. I fully agree with you. And I think articulating value in the right way in this era of Gen AI is going to be absolutely critical for all law firms. And when I think about it, I think about value in 3 ways. Efficiency, definitely one. Experience is the other, and capability is the third. So we tend to jump to efficiency very quickly with Gen AI because we see how fast it is. And definitely we are seeing really huge efficiency gains, without a doubt. But it's not just efficiency. In terms of sort of client experience, i.e., can we be even more responsive? Can the quality of what we deliver be better because we have been faster to do the grunt work, and we can spend more time in making a really tailored product for the client? Can the lawyer experience be better? Can our lawyers go home earlier, frankly, or do more interesting work? And that's really important. Law firms are taking that really seriously now, I think, because there's a high risk of burnout with the kind of hours that these people are working. And capability, what things can we do now that we couldn't do before? What value can we give we couldn't do before?
We had quite an interesting one. Anthony may recall this. We were in the US sitting down with a partner who does corporate work, and he was talking about, like, you look at the stats of how many M&A deals fail, and what if you could actually, using a data-backed approach, actually identify certain trends. And yes, you're providing the legal advice, but you're also providing insights regarding things that impact on business outcomes, things that could lead to, a more successful outcome afterwards. What if there were certain terms or certain things that came out in due diligence that actually led to a higher chance of, post-merger that actually leading to something, really positive. And I think it kind of excites me to think that that's the direction that we're going, because the way I was sold into being a lawyer, yes, you get to work on these exciting big transactions, but you're also the trusted advisor.
Yeah.
And I feel like as, things have progressed, the world's become more complicated, you end up, particularly as a transactional lawyer, so much of it's just grind.
Yeah.
Whereas, it kind of excites me to think that this might put us in the position of being trusted advisors again, and not just trusted advisors, but coming to the client with, real insights and delivering really positive outcomes.
Definitely. I was at a partner retreat, a capital markets partner retreat in Madrid, and they had a panel who was an incredibly impressive man. And we were asking him these questions, about what does value mean to you? And he used exactly those words. He says, you've got the opportunity now to become the real trusted advisor to our business, better understand our business, use that time, that productivity gain time to better understand and serve us in a different way. So absolutely. I also think one says, yeah, we can start to look at the root causes and predictive, but it's actually quite hard to do, really. Although I think it's possible. I think it's challenging, and it's a different way of delivering. It's a different way of thinking about how we serve our clients, from being the people that fix the problems to the people that, prevent them happening in the first place. That is a different role. So that's going to be a maturity thing, I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, a really big thank you, Isabel. It's been fantastic having you on the podcast. I think if there's some things I've taken away from today is just absolutely doubling down on the importance of culture when innovating. I think it's not spoken about enough, and I think it is absolutely fundamental to everything we do. I'm really excited about how you think about a law firm culture, not just negatively, but also positively. I think working with the lawyers is something that's very much stood out for me, and thinking like, what are the positives? How we're not going to fight this culture. We're not going to achieve a huge amount. We do fight it, but how do we work with this? How do we harness the benefits of it to achieve great things? And then to reflect on new ways of providing value to clients and an opportunity to define that in the future, I think is really, really exciting. So it's been an absolute pleasure having you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And I look forward to talking to you and working together further soon.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's been a really great conversation.